my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I've got another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we are talking about The Familiars by Stacey Hall. First of all, can we just take a moment and appreciate how beautiful this cover is? I love it. Second of all, I loved this book. It was such an interesting, well-written story. So first of all, let me tell you, this book takes place in the early 1600s, and it involves it kind of involves a real situation, and that is the hanging of the Pendle witches in Lancaster County, England. This was a real thing, like I said, that happened, where 10 people were tried as witches, 9 women and 1 man or boy who was the son of one of the women. And 9 of them were hanged and 1 was acquitted. Found not guilty, let go. This story is about people who really existed, but it's not a true story. Like, for example, the one witch that was acquitted, which we will get into a lot when we talk about this book, there's no record of why she was. So this book kind of makes up a reason why. So the book starts off and we meet a woman named Fleetwood Shuttleworth. Was a real person, that was her real name. And she's a young woman, she's about 17 years old. She's married to a man named Richard Shuttleworth, and they live in a grand home. You know, they're a wealthy family. The marriage was pretty well set up by her mother, which I'm sure was quite, you know, the regular way to do things back in the day. Her father died when she was very young, so it had been her and her mother, and she didn't have a very happy childhood. They also grew up in a rather grand home, but you know, for her mother, it was a lot. She was now left to raise a small child by herself, and it didn't go well for either of them. And so finally the time comes when she can marry her daughter off to this man named Richard, who's fairly young and wealthy, and she brought her wealth to the table, and it was a fairly good union. She liked Richard. They got on well. So all in all things considered, she lucked out in her marriage. So before too long, her mother is moved from their old home, which was called like the Barton family home, and she was moved into a different home, and she was taken care of by Richard and Fleetwood. So at the beginning of the book, a letter kind of accidentally comes into Fleetwood's possession, and in the letter the doctor pretty much says that if she gets pregnant again, not only will the baby not survive it, but she won't survive it. And this comes as very shocking news to her because she's currently pregnant. And she doesn't really know why her husband didn't share this letter with her, and she's understandably very alarmed. Also at the beginning of the story, she's walking the grounds and she sees a young girl there who's kind of holding the body of a rabbit, like the dead body of a rabbit. And she talks to her a bit and tells her, you know, you can't be here. If my husband saw you on our property, there'd be a big problem. So you should go and be done with it. So for a lot of the book, we're just kind of learning about Shuttleworth and Richard and their lives. And we know that she's pregnant and she doesn't feel well. She's lost 3 other children before this one, and she's starting to really worry that she's just not going to be able to give him an heir. And of course, this is 1612 when this is happening, and an heir was everything. It was everything, and if you couldn't provide one, you felt as though you weren't living up to your duty as a wife. So it of course is decided that she needs a midwife, and she needs a good one. Shortly after that, though, before she's able to settle on a midwife, because she doesn't want the one she's had before, they've been of no help to her and she's still lost the babies. So one day she is out riding on her horse, which is something she loves to do. She's not one to stay cooped up in the house all day, every day. You know, she gets cabin fever and she just likes to be out in the fresh air. So she's out riding and she has a bit of an accident. She falls off her horse and she hurts her wrist. And kind of just there is the girl once again from her garden with the rabbit, and she helps her get back to her feet. She takes some material and wraps up her wrist, and they just get to talking a little bit, and Fleetwood tells her about what's going on with her and her pregnancies. And the woman, who we learn is named Alice Gray, she begins to kind of give some advice to her about herbs she could take, or different plants she could chew on to help with the sick feelings. And so Fleetwood is really taken with her, and she invites her to come back to the house and help her to be her midwife, because when they were talking, she found out that this girl's mother was a midwife, and her mother before her, and so she has all this experience. So she comes back to the house and she gets Fleetwood all set up. She tells her she'll be back the next day with a bunch of herbs and all of the things that she needs. And when she does come back, she brings a lot of very helpful things. She also wants to get some of the blood out of Fleetwood, so she drains some of the blood from her arms, because she feels like that is lending itself to her feeling so ill. And so they kind of do this quietly, because Fleetwood can just kind of feel that it's something her husband probably wouldn't approve of, because it's a more natural take from what would have been called back then wise women, which were sometimes called witches. But Fleetwood isn't scared of Alice. She trusts her. She gets a really good feeling from her. And then within a few days, she's feeling a lot better. She can eat. She can stay awake for longer periods of time. She feels like she's coming back into herself a bit. And Alice had left herbs for her to give to the cooks to mix into butter and to make into tea, and she's been taking this throughout the days. Shortly after that, buzz starts picking up around the Pendle witches, and that a bunch of them have been arrested. And one of the women that gets arrested, Fleetwood recognizes, as she had seen Alice with that woman one day when they were walking. And it kind of gives her pause. She's a little worried about that, but not so much in that it makes her trust Alice any less, but more worried in the sense that what if her association got her in trouble down the road. Before too long, there's an incident at the house where a ruby necklace goes missing, and it was an heirloom from Richard's grandmother or something, one of the women in his family, I think his grandmother. And of course, he is very upset by this news, and he gathers all the staff together, including Alice, and he's very, very mad. He's yelling at them, and then he's saying, I expect it to be returned right away, and he tells Alice to leave, and it's just this huge thing. And Fleetwood is so upset by this because, first of all, she doesn't think it was Alice, and she's upset that Alice was kind of singled out like that. In time, the necklace is returned, but it hadn't been taken by Alice. I don't think they ever know who had taken it. But anyway, at one point as well, I know this book talk is kind of all over the place. It's kind of like, because as I'm recalling the elements of the story, it doesn't flow quite the way some do, but it flows when you're reading it. So anyway, so shortly thereafter, Fleetwood is going through her husband's ledgers, and she sees listed in the ledgers a bunch of things being bought and sent to Barton, which is the home that she grew up in, which to her knowledge has been empty for the 4 years that they've been married. And just all kinds of things like soaps and food and things that like you wouldn't be sending to an empty house. And so she decides she's going to take her horse and she's going to go and see what is going on out at Barton. And she doesn't want to say anything to Richard because she doesn't want him to try to stop her, and she doesn't want to hear whatever nonsense he's going to say about it. So she just goes on her own. So once she gets out there, she walks into the house and she sees that somebody's there. And to her kind of shock, the person that she finds there is a young woman who is very pregnant. And all of a sudden, kind of all of the pieces come together in her mind. And on this trip, she's taken Alice with her. So all of the pieces kind of come together in her mind, and she realizes that this is her husband's mistress. And that not only has he taken a mistress, but he has put her up pregnant in her family home. I mean, burn the whole man down if you ask me. But so she decides she's not going home. She's not going back to him. And she goes to her mother's house, which that tells you how much she didn't want to go home, because going to her mother's house certainly wouldn't be at the top of her list of places to go. So she goes there, she brings Alice with her, but all of a sudden, in the past days, the rustling and rumors of witches, Alice's name has started to be thrown around because she was seen with a bunch of them at a certain spot, and so her name has been added to the list. So she introduces Alice to her mom as Jill, just so that her mom doesn't put two and two together. And they stay there for a few days. Richard writes letters to her and her mom, but Fleetwood doesn't even open her. She's not interested in what he has to say right now. So she asks her mother if her mother knew about the woman staying at Barton, and her mother says that she did. And she kind of says, you know, this is just what happens. Men take mistresses, and you just got to deal with it. And you know, this is 1612, so I guess you just got to deal with it. And of course, having seen that this other woman, who she now knows is named Judith, is pregnant, that kind of makes Fleetwood feel even more inadequate. And it makes her feel like, if I don't manage to carry this baby, he's going to replace me. He'll just move me out and move her in, and no one will care. So she stays with her mom for a few days until finally Richard comes to get her. And he tells her that everything's going to be okay. Her and Alice need to just come home now. And, you know, to Fleetwood, she has really put her success in this pregnancy. She credits it to Alice for all of the herbs and wellness and natural medicine that she's been giving her. So they go, eventually she gives in and she goes back with Richard. And when they get there, she learns that it's all kind of been a setup, because waiting there is Roger, and he's a family friend, but he's a nuisance, and he's got it in for these women, and he's determined that they're all witches, and he won't let it rest. And so when they arrive there, he's there with the police, and they immediately arrest Alice on the spot, while Richard's kind of dragging Fleetwood into the house while she's crying to Alice, like, please don't take her. So Richard at this point is not really in her good books. Between the mistress she's found, now him luring her back to the house with the intention, like knowing that somebody will be waiting there to arrest Alice, she's mad. And she barely talks to him. She won't eat. She brings up the mistress, but he's just kind of like, you know, it's just what happens. Like, so a few days later, she takes off on a horse, and she goes to the prison where all of the witches are being held, and she manages to talk her way into going down to visit Alice. And they are what is called a well tower, which is like basically a really deep well, and you take stairs down into it, and that's where the prisoners are kept. So because she comes from a wealthy home, she has a bit of weight to throw around, and she's able to give the guards a penny, and they let her go down. She's able to talk to Alice, and she tells her, listen, I know that you're not a witch. I know it. And I'm going to help you because you saved me, and now I'm going to save you. And Alice is like, that'd be great, but I don't know how you're going to do it. And the weird thing too is that these witches, they're the witnesses to their witchcraft are all themselves. Like, they've all kind of ganged up on themselves at this point. And the reason Alice has been brought into it is she was dating a man. She was in love with him. He was a widow. He had a small child. And while they were together, that small child died, and Alice hadn't been able to save her. So now she's been arrested for murder via witchcraft of this child, even though the only thing that had happened was that she wasn't able to save this girl. And so, because of her association with some women who have been arrested for being witches, she has just been thrown into the mix. And we later find out the man that she had loved had, in his grief over losing his daughter, had been easily swayed by Roger, the Shuttleworth's family friend that I had mentioned earlier. He pays the man to kind of really go in on this girl and say that he thinks she's a witch. So Fleetwood. So Fleetwood is finding all of this out, and she's in her mind trying to figure out how in God's name she can save this girl. And so she knows that she's going to go and give a, testimony of her experience with Alice and how Alice has saved her, and how just because she's a wise woman who knows how to work her herbs and natural things doesn't mean she's a witch. So as time goes on, she gets an idea, and she decides that she is going to go to this man, this John, whoever, that Alice had been with, whose daughter died, and she's going to she takes her husband's gun, his musket, and off she goes on her horse, and she knocks on his door. It's pouring rain out. Like, she's very pregnant at this point. She should not be out. It's midnight, and she knocks on the door, and she's got the gun, and he's like, okay, what are you gonna do, kill me? And she's like, yes, unless you write down an account of what actually happened, and you state that Alice did nothing wrong, and you just tell the truth. And she's like, I don't care how much Roger's paying you. My family owns a brewery, because she can smell the alcohol on him. And Alice had said that he had problems with alcohol. And she says, my family owns a brewery, and if you do this, I will make sure lots of ale is delivered to your door every month. And that's enough for him. She had his attention then. He writes it down, and off she goes. And he says, listen, even if she swings, I still want the ale. And Fleetwood is like, yeah, you got it. So off she goes. As she's riding home, it's such bad weather. She gets turned around. She ends up having a bit of an accident, falling off her horse. She falls. She's in the forest. She feels like she might be near home, but she's not sure. She's laying on the ground. She's in a lot of pain, searing pain, and she can see and feel animals coming out of the forest, and they're boars. And boars are animals that she's been scared of her whole life, even when she was little. And she has nightmares about them, and now she feels like, okay, the nightmares, this is why I've been having nightmares, because this is how it's all going to end for me. And then she kind of passes out. Luckily, though, soon she's found by someone who recognizes her because she is fairly close to their home. Richard is in Lancaster because he went there for the trial, which was about to begin. And so they have to send someone to go get him, and he returns with a midwife. So not the full-on delivery, but labor has begun, and the midwife says to Richard, who as quickly as he could got to Fleetwood, she says, I don't think her or the baby are going to make it. In Fleetwood's delirium, in her pocket, she still has the letter from John and her own testimony that has to be read at the trials that day. And she begs Richard to just leave her there and take the letters and go and read them in front of the judges and jury. And at first he says no. He's like, I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving you. And then when he hears the new midwife say that the baby and Fleetwood won't make it. In his heart, he now knows that he has to go and he has to beg for Alice's life. And then he has to please be able to take her immediately so she can come and save Fleetwood. And that's what he does. And he's able to bring her back in time for her to deliver the baby. And so in the actual stories of the Pendle Witches, Alice Gray was the 10th one that was acquitted, that was found not guilty and set free. So that is the way that Stacey has spun this story as to why Alice was acquitted. Because like I said at the beginning, no one really knows why she was. So yes, after that, the baby's born, it's healthy, it's a boy. And amongst all the commotion, you know, after the baby's delivered, Alice puts a kiss on Fleetwood's forehead. And then amongst all the commotion, Alice slips away. And she's gone. And days pass and Fleetwood doesn't see her again. She doesn't come back. Fleetwood doesn't know where she is. And of course now she's a busy new mom. So, you know, her body's trying to heal and she's tending to her child. So it's not like she has time to go searching for her and like where would she even look. So, yeah, she's just gone. But she helped Fleetwood stay alive and helped her baby come safely. So there were a few things after that Fleetwood brings up with Richard that she wants to know the truth about. Like she wants to know why didn't he show her that letter? And he's like, what letter? And then she shows him and he's reading it and he says, because it wasn't about you. And she says, what do you mean? And he says, this letter is about Judith. And that's the letter saying if she had another child, her and the child wouldn't survive it. And she says, but it says here that your wife, like your wife is how this is worded. And he said, well, I had to tell them that. And so, you know, she's hurt and she's heartbroken, but he tries to give a reason to her why it had happened. You know, he says, after you kept losing the babies, he said, you were so hurt and so upset and you didn't want me near you and I was scared I would hurt you. And so I found comfort elsewhere. And she, you know, let me see how she words it here. Why do you go to her? I whispered. He seemed to consider his answer for some time and covered my hand with his. His rings glittered and his voice was almost a whisper. I saw how you were when the babies died. I saw how ill it made you and I was afraid of hurting you again. Even then, after all we had been through, I could not hate him. And that's kind of how it finishes up. With that, he moves the woman out of Fleetwood's family home because obviously that was a big point of contention for her. And the final scene in the book is actually Fleetwood going out to Barton, the home, and burning it to the ground, which I loved. I thought that was a great, you know, she had had such an unhappy childhood there, and then his mistress having lived there, she just wanted it gone. And then as she was turning to leave, she sees a fox in the forest near the house, and her and the fox catch eyes, and then when she blinks, it's gone. And we're left with that reference, and that's something I didn't mention a whole lot about as we're talking about the book, just because it wasn't a major point. But familiars, if you're familiar with witches or, you know, witchcraft or anything like that, you'll know that witches tend to have a familiar, and that's an animal that is a spirit that helps them, guides them, that they really connect with. And while Alice had never said it, Fleetwood had always had the feeling that Alice's familiar was a fox. And so when she sees that fox, she gets a bit of relief and peace, thinking that that was, you know, on behalf of Alice. Just seeing it made her feel better. So there you go, you guys. It's an interesting story. It's so well written. I find anything involving magic and witches, I love to read. That's something that just sparks my interest so much. Ever since I was a little girl, I just loved reading about it, and about the beauty and the magic of using the earth, you know, the herbs and the natural remedies and the medicines. I love hearing about that and learning about that. And I love reading it in fiction as well. So if you do too, you might love this book. And again, look at this cover. So pretty. Little fox there. All right, you guys, that's going to do it for me for today. I hope you enjoyed this book talk. If you did, leave a like. And if you want, subscribe. I would love to have you join my channel. I love making new friends. And I will see you guys on Monday. Bye.